But wouldn't you agree that the idea of white privilege promotes a racist idea to try to separate us by race more than ideas or motivations?
I think it's acknowledging the history of our nation and claiming that we do have a lot more work to do in promoting, through live streaming. Can you help me?
You need help? You need help. See, this is what I'm talking about, bro. You have students here who literally will fight to the death to defend this privilege.
The white privilege one. Yeah, I mean, white privilege, it's a lie.
White privilege is a lie.
So it doesn't exist.
Okay. And why do you think white privilege does not exist?
There's twice as many white people than black people living in poverty in America. The richest racial groups in America are not white people. They are Asian Americans and Indian Americans.
Well, I would say about that specific stat right there, and I don't mean to be that guy, but the population of America is only 13% black and 70% white. But also, they're still people. So you can't just be like, well, numbers say, well, they're still humans. So you could say there's a larger majority of black people in our race who are living in poverty rather than the white race, but you're dealing with actual lives here. But anyways, let's continue.
The melanin complexion in an Indian American's person's skin is most akin to a black individual, so that kind of destroys the whole idea of colorism. There's good choice privilege, there's wealth privilege, but has nothing to do with the color of your skin.
So you don't think that someone that is born white is just based off of the color of their skin has more advantages in...
There is zero evidence to suggest that. In fact, there's evidence to suggest the opposite.
There's nothing that you could say to make me think that that's...
Well, so why do you think Asian Americans are the richest racial group in America? Why don't we ever hear about...
And one thing I would say about the argument white privilege, and he kind of just touched on it. Why wouldn't you want to be the richest group in your own in your land? You get what I'm saying? If the people who support like the phrase like all white people have white privilege no matter what, because I've heard that phrase a lot. I'm not just bringing that up out of nowhere. I heard that a lot. First of all, the average white citizen doesn't even make $65,000 a year, if that. That's like that maybe middle class, maybe on the lower ends of middle class. So if you have all this privilege, why wouldn't you want your entire race to be rich? Am I tripping? Like, isn't that the ultimate form of privilege? Like money, where you can do whatever you want, buy wherever you want, go wherever you want. Wouldn't you want your entire race to just be the richest group? But that's just not true. And when people say white privilege, they always bring up rich CEOs. They always bring up millionaire white families and owners of sports clubs and all these affluent white people. But the average white person lives a very normal life. Like, they're not rich. They're barely middle class. Let's be 100. Let's be honest. So if you just say like, yeah, they all have white privilege, I don't like that phrase because there are other races other than black people in America. So are they just not included in the white privilege argument? Do Asian people, like, do they also have white privilege? Do Indian people also have white privilege? Or I hear this a lot, when they get successful, they just got there because they acted white. Like, it doesn't make much sense to me when you really sit and break it down on numbers. But let's continue.
Asian American privilege.
I don't think it has to do with... Sorry, it's hard for me to find the right word to say right now.
Or what about like Indian Americans from the country
You
India?
can't argue with the fact that certain races are more discriminated against.
Give me an example of institutional discrimination.
I mean, look at the facts.
What facts?
The facts are that people that are, for example, that have black colored skin are more likely. I mean, I can pull up some facts.
So let's talk about...
I hate when people say that. I hate when people say, well, police brutality to justify white privilege. Because first of all, when you say white privilege, you're talking about, when I hear it, you're talking about Caucasian Americans. There are other groups other than black and white, and Caucasian Americans. There are Asian people in America. They're Hispanic Americans. Are they just ignored in this conversation, or they live somewhere in between the spectrum of privilege and no privilege? So if that's the case, if white people have the ultimate privilege and black people have no privilege at all, shouldn't it be linear? Like, shouldn't the closer you get to white, the less police brutality should happen to you, according to your argument? But that's just not true. None of this makes sense. It doesn't make sense. It's like people nitpick facts. And the fact of the matter is, I looked it up just now. The average white person or white family makes $68,000 a year. Why wouldn't it be $80,000 at least? Or if that's the case, why are Asian Americans out earning white Americans and right now? Why is that the case? And the reason I really don't like this argument about white privilege and not having privilege as a black person and you're just at the bottom of the barrel, because it kind of dehumanizes African Americans. It really dehumanizes us. It paints the picture that we aren't able to, for one, succeed on our own without the help of others because we're so disadvantaged. Or it paints the picture that whenever we do something, we're just a victim of the system. Like, we're not also capable of making our own decisions. But anyways, let's continue this.
Police brutality. So black people compose 48% of the U.S. prison population, yet commit 57% of the crimes. They're under-incarcerated. A police officer is 18 and a half times more likely to be shot by a black person than a black person is to be shot by a police officer. Those are facts. An independent study of over 1,000 police departments across the country by the Department of Justice found 0 instances of racial discrimination. And that was done by Loretta Lynch and Eric Holder's more left-tilting Department of Justice.
That statistic, I'm sorry y'all, but he just kind of misused the statistic. He said under-incarcerated because 48%, he said we commit 57% of the crime, but we are 48% of the prisons. That doesn't mean we're under-incarcerated. Because when he said that, it implies that only like one person did one crime to end up in prison, where in real life that's not the case. Criminals usually do more than one crime. So within that 57%, that 48% could have done all that 57%. They just could have done it before they went to prison. But anyways, let's continue.
But wouldn't you agree that the idea of white privilege promotes a racist idea to try to separate us by race more than ideas or motivations?
I think it's acknowledging the history of our nation and claiming that we do have a lot more work to do in promoting. In live streams. Can you help me? I'm having a hard time.
You need help?
What? Your opinion, what is the definition of race?
You need help. See, this is what I'm talking about, bro. You have students here who literally will fight to the death to defend this privilege. You don't even know why you're defending it. And I hate this because people like you are the reason who enable bad behavior in other communities. You're enabling it because you look at a black person, a black man or a black woman or a black child, and and I'm not saying this is true. This is just an example. You could be seeing them and you'd be like, what they're doing is not right. You can say that to yourself, but you won't say it out loud. You won't say it in public. You'll just be like, well, maybe they're doing it because they're disadvantaged. And I hate that because black people can make their own decisions. We can do bad things the same way we can do good things. And the problem is, if you don't accept the fact that black people can do bad things, I don't think you can accept the fact that black people can do good things. I think it makes you a little more racist. I think if you look at black people and say, well, they're only doing that because they're disadvantaged. If you look at a successful black person, an intelligent black person, I don't think you can look at them and say, they got there on their own. They really earned that. I don't think you can. Because you don't even know why you're defending this privilege. You have no idea. But you just know tooth and nail you're going to fight to the death to defend it. But anyways, let's go.
Racism?
Yeah.
Well, there is a textbook definition. I can give you that.
Okay.
So
Wait.
putting forth a prejudice or presupposition upon a group of people or individual based solely on their skin color.
Okay.
So white privilege is racist because it puts a prejudice. Now, prejudice can be positive or negative. So saying that white people are privileged just based on the melanin content of their skin, that's a racist idea. It'd be like saying black people are stupid, which I don't believe. Because you wouldn't say that, right?
I would not say that.
Right, but you would be comfortable with saying white privilege?
Yes, because I think we differ on our ideas of racism.
Then tell me your definition of racism.
By definition, racism requires oppression, and in America, white people have never been largely oppressed, and largely
Oh my
white
God.
people have been the oppressors throughout history.
So let me ask you a question. Do you think Jewish people are white?
Absolutely, but they have not been oppressed.
Do you think they had a... Wait, hold on a second. Do you think they had a good 20th... Do you think Jewish people had a good 20th century? Hold on. Do you think Jewish people... Do you think Jewish people had a good 20th century? You said they've never been oppressed. Jewish people have never been oppressed?
I'm not saying that Jewish people have never been oppressed.
You did say that. But I'll give you an opportunity to walk that back.
I think she was referring more to
Jewish people have not been oppressed in the same regard that people of color, specifically black people.
You're right. They had it much...
The reason I don't like this argument is because when you say a group of people who have been systemically oppressed, which obviously slavery existed in America, it happened here. We all know that. But the reason why I don't like this specific argument about, well, you can only experience racism if you've been oppressed as a community is because that means no matter what happens, black people will always be deemed as disadvantaged. And the reason I say that is because we've always experienced oppression. Meaning that when slavery happened, whenever it happened, it will still happen at that time 100 years from now. So when it's 3024, slavery still happened in the 1800s. When it's 4024, slavery still happened in the 1800s. So my thing is, if you're saying, well, you've been oppressed during this time, so that means you'll always be disadvantaged, we can never move from that. So it kind of blocks progress in a way. It really blocks it. Because if your argument is, well, we did slavery, so do you have to move up to a certain point to where you can't use that anymore to justify current oppression? Or is it just something that will always be there no matter what? And the reason it's a problem is because if you think it will always be there no matter what, that means that no matter what happens in society, you'll think we're oppressed. We could be the richest group in the world and you'll still think we're oppressed. So it's just not a fair argument through and through. But let's continue.
Much worse in the 20th
In the
century.
United States.
There was widespread anti-Semitic discrimination throughout the 20th
They were not
century.
enslaved within the United States.
Asian Americans were.
And that's a problem.
And yet they're the richest racial group in America right now.
Economic and upward mobility, I do not think disidentifies and disengages racism throughout the country and racist ideology.
You're right. So it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with choices.
I don't exactly have an interest in arguing. I was just curious about your
No,
thoughts.
trust me, this is not arguing. But
I think we've gotten enough content. I wish you well, and I appreciate your enjoyment of the freedom of speech.
that's what it's all about.
Okay. Anyways, if you have any suggestions for me, comment down below. For Jojo,